My guest today is Dr. Einat Wilf. She's a leading intellectual and original thinker on matters of foreign policy, economics, education, Israel, and the Jewish people. She was a member of the Israeli Parliament from 2010 to 2013 on behalf of the Labor and Independence parties. Dr. Wilf has a BA in Government and Fine Arts from Harvard, an MBA from INSEAD in France, that's the Institute for European Administrative Affairs, and a PhD in Political Science from the University of Cambridge. Born and raised in Israel, Dr. Wilf served as an intelligence officer in the Israeli Defense Forces. Yes, the IDF. Oh boy, we're going to get into that today as well. She's also the author of 6 books, including My Israel, Our Generation, Back to Basics, How to Save Israeli Education at No Additional Cost. That's actually in the subtitle. I like that. It's Not the Electoral System, Stupid. Echoing Bill Clinton, It's Not the Economy, Stupid. Winning the War of Words, Telling Our Story, a collection of her essays on Israel, Zionism, and the Path to Peace. And her new book, which you can see behind her right shoulder there, is The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. All right, Einat, nice to see you. Thanks for coming on to talk to me.
You.
We
Thank
met
you.
in Tucson at that dialogue conference that the theme of that was, are we on the right side of history? Which I've often argued we are, and things are going great. But I have to admit, the points you made in that discussion about things that are happening in the Middle East certainly sets back a little bit. And here's the front page of the Wall Street Journal today about China and Taiwan. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. There are still issues. So where are you, by the way?
I'm in Tel Aviv at home.
You're in Tel Aviv, and you're safe there? You feel pretty much like...
Right now, it feels calm. It feels safe, but it all feels also very fragile and precarious at the same time.
Right. And you're still reasonably confident in the Iron Dome to protect you?
Oh, that works. That part works. It's just that really one of the things that happened for Israelis after October 7th is that what happened on that day was so beyond any notion of what's possible, what might happen, beyond any person's imagination, is that things that were impossible in our minds became probable. So right now you can come up with pretty much any crazy scenario, and most Israelis will be like, sure, that could happen.
Well, let's talk about that, since you were a member of the IDF, and its reputation is pretty high for being a strong defensive force, and your intelligence agencies and all that are second to none. What happened? How did this happen?
So on the intelligence side, I actually have a good sense, precisely because I was in the intelligence. When I served in the intelligence, we're talking about the late 80s, early 90s, I came out of my service with basically saying that I think we can close down our intelligence agencies and settle for doing something quite simple, which is listen to what the Arabs are saying. Especially in the Arab world, what the Arabs say publicly is of high value, and what they say privately is worthless. So, and it's contrary to how a lot of people think about intelligence and the value of words. When things are told to you privately, people tend to value them. But in the Arab world, it's exactly the opposite. If things are not said publicly, if you are being told things privately, you think they're really important, they're actually worthless. So if you look throughout the history, Arabs have always told us what their intentions were, for good, for bad, and they followed through. But we had this tendency to say, no, we know better, So especially intelligence agency, and I think this is not unique to Israel, is they have a tendency to value things that cost them a lot of money and are really secretive. So if we ended up sending a commando unit to bug somebody's phone, what comes out of that, we're always going to value it so much more than what's like the headline of a newspaper in Syria. But actually, that headline is far more valuable than the secret phone calls. So now when we're looking back, we actually saw, and this is what my book is about, The War of Return, the Palestinians have told us repeatedly, consistently, for a century by now, that they have a very clear goal. And the goal is to prevent and then to undo Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. The leaders of Hamas, the people of Gaza, they've made it very clear that they have no interest in Gaza as a territory to develop for themselves, to make it into the pearl of the Mediterranean. As far as they're concerned, the fact that Gaza sits on a beautiful strip of beach, that it is at the crossroads of two ancient trade routes, it doesn't matter because they're not interested in a project of building. They are interested, and again, as they have said it and made very clear, they are interested above everything else in the destruction of Jewish sovereignty. So they've said it. And the thing is this: the women, for example, the young soldiers whose job was to actually look with their eyes. They said there's intensive preparations. Basically, Hamas was hiding in plain sight. We were seeing all those preparations. But again, the higher ups were like, oh, we know better. We have secret intelligence. We know what Sinwar is thinking. So they actually dismissed everything that was publicly said, everything that was seen with people's eyes. So clearly there was also a gender element. They were young women. The officers, by and large, were older men. So there was clearly a gender element of dismissing their warnings, but it was also the tendency to overvalue things that are secret and costly over what you can actually see openly with your eyes. So the intelligence failure, I actually get. If you don't want to see something, you're not going to see it. The military failure, once there was an intelligence failure, I don't get. This is something that still haunts Israeli society. We are yet to get good answers. How is it that for 8, 10, 12, sometimes 24 hours within the state of Israel, as you know, Israel's a small country, where was the military, remains a big question.
Yeah, wow. Einat, that's incredible. That's the best explanation I've heard yet. Yeah, there's a couple of psychological effects there, sunk cost and ownership of something. The more money you put into something, the more you value it, whether it's valuable or not. So if they say from the river to the sea, they mean it. It's not just a slogan. Or when they say, we want to wipe Israel off the map, we should listen to that. Like when Hitler said, this is what I want to do. People said, oh, he doesn't really mean that. Yeah, actually he does.
Precisely. This is what I'm most proud of in the book, The War of Return, D&I. What the book actually does, it gives Palestinians the respect of taking them at their word, of actually treating them as agents in history that know what they're fighting for, that are very serious about it, and that are willing to mobilize themselves and sacrifice themselves for that goal. Over the years, when I would go and present the book, the thesis, especially in European capitals, explaining why an organization like UNRWA, which keeps for Palestinians the idea that Israel is a temporary aberration, why they need to defund it, they would say things like, the Palestinians know that Israel is not going anywhere. It's a delusion. So following that, I invented a word. I called it West-plaining. And it's when Western diplomats and journalists explain away some inconvenient things that Palestinians will say. So they will say, from the river to the sea. And again, people are trying to pretend now that it's a benign idea, just a neutral democracy of all. So I like to go to the original. The original wording in Arabic, before it was translated to the catchy English, was from water to water, Palestine will be Arab. So in case anyone is wondering, they make it very clear that there will be no Jewish sovereignty anywhere in the land. So even now, you had several European countries recognizing Palestine. And immediately they said, but Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. A classic West-plaining, because the Palestinians are like, it absolutely does. Yay, October 7th. But it would be inconvenient for countries like Norway or Ireland or Spain to admit that they're recognizing Palestine and that Palestinians very much support Hamas. So they say we're recognizing Palestine and Hamas doesn't represent Palestinians. So this tendency to West plane over what Palestinians are clearly saying is at the source of so much of the lies we tell ourselves. And for me, the main message is actually give them the respect of taking them at their word.
Do you think that a lot of European leaders, politicians, and especially intellectuals in the West just can't believe that level of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel still exists? Aren't we supposed to be past all that now, and therefore they can't really mean that?
So you give the benign interpretation. And again, sometimes when they tell me, oh, they're delusional, it can't be, kind of feeding into your analysis that they just don't believe it's possible, I always tell them, open a map. When they open a map, they see 7 million Jews surrounded by 500 million Arabs, more than 1 billion Muslims, the vast majority of which remain hostile to the idea of Jewish sovereignty anywhere in the land, because it's important to know, ever since the 7th century Arab and Muslim conquests of the Middle East, of North Africa, hugely successful, the only kind of Jew they ever knew was powerless, stateless, meek, one that was given a lower status in their societies. I always like to give 2 examples because I think they really give a flavor. Jews in Arab and Muslim societies could not ride horses. Horses were a mark of dignity. They could only ride donkeys. They could not carry arms. They were not allowed to defend themselves because defending them was the prerogative of the Arab and Muslim ruler. That's how the hierarchy was clarified. Sometimes the rulers protected them more, sometimes less, but certainly Jews were not allowed to defend themselves by themselves. Now, when you look at the early Jews of early Zionism, the late 19th century, early 20th century, when they were inspired by this idea of self-determination, self-mastery, there's 2 things that immediately stand out in the pictures. They are riding horses and they are carrying arms. Now, imagine the civilizational shock to the system that this is a Jew. You know, those that were supposed to be your inferiors, the powerless, the stateless. So the Arab and Muslim obsession, in many ways, with putting the Jews back in their proper place, supposedly defenseless, stateless, of a lower status, is what animates much of the conflict. So you're right that I'm sure there's quite a few people who just can't believe it, that think, okay, this doesn't make sense. Even though I tell them, look at the numbers, they are being completely rational in their perspective to imagine that they can make 7 million Jews either violently disappear or go away. They're not being irrational here. But sometimes, I've been doing this for many years now. And I can say this, the case that I make is compelling mostly because it's entirely based on evidence. And there's actually no counter evidence, right? This is your field, the evidence, the search for truth. There's actually no counter evidence. All the evidence is on one side. The Palestinians are consistent over time. They're clearly saying those things. So in recent years, I've become to think, okay, is it all about ignorance, failure to believe, disbelief? Or is it perhaps somewhere deep in the European psyche and even the Western psyche, there is still actually a support for this idea? Do they also find the idea of sovereign Jews somewhat still difficult to stomach? I don't know.
When I was writing my book on the Holocaust denying history, I kind of noticed a theme that, the Nazis didn't kill the Jews, but they should have. There was kind of that underlying current. The anti-Semitism is deep in there. So I guess what I'm asking next then is, okay, forget Western intellectuals. Do they really just hate Jews? It's just the ancient, thousands of years old anti-Semitism, or is there something new in it as well? Just the anti-Zionism? Do you separate those as different kinds of hatred?
So first on the hatred itself, because the hatred confuses people. A lot of people are like, I don't hate Jews, I'm just angry at Israel or that. I mean, and they look at it as a very personal emotion. And when they see that emotion missing, they're like, well, then I can't be anti Semitic because anti Semitism is a hatred. I actually define anti Semitism somewhat differently. I define it as the scapegoating mechanism of societies in crisis. Rene Girard, the intellectual, the anthropologist, he said that societies in crisis, he studied the mechanism of scapegoating. He says societies in crisis ask two questions: what to do and who to blame. Societies that ultimately emphasize what to do emerge from the crisis because they ask what to do, they ultimately answer it, and they emerge from the crisis. Societies that enter a vortex of who to blame and never move away from it ultimately kind of sink deep into that crisis and sometimes collapse. This is why anti-Semitism is often the thing that brings societies down. So anti-Semitism is a scapegoating mechanism. It basically takes societies in crisis, especially those in the West and in the Muslim world, because I was once asked, okay, we can get a scapegoating mechanism, but why the Jews? And I say, at least in Western society that has a strong substrate of Christianity, and in Muslim society, there's already by now millennia of invested cultural capital in the scapegoating of Jews. If you were to try to scapegoat today all the people over 6 feet, you'll have a harder case to make. But with Jews, you only need to say baby killers, the children in Gaza, and merely with those few words, you're tapping into centuries and millennia of cultural capital, of the blood libels, the idea that Jews have a ritual bloodlust for the blood of non-Jewish children. And that's it. You're already playing into that. So you're playing into already established conspiracy theories about the nefarious ends and purposes and means of Jews. Now, where does the hatred come from? It does not precede the scapegoating. It's actually the outcome of the scapegoating. Because imagine you're being told, Germany lost because of the Jews. All your savings reduced to nothings because of the Jews. Recently, a few years ago, an American Congresswoman, Cori Bush, said that Americans don't have universal health care because of the money that goes to Israel. Now, I come from a universal health care country. I personally think it's an abomination that Americans don't have universal health care. But the reason that Americans don't have universal health care has nothing to do with the money that goes to Israel. But because she failed in her job to get universal health care, she says it's Israel. Now imagine the implications. She's basically saying your father's cancer treatment is not covered because of Israel. You're going to start hating. The hatred will be the emotional outcome of the scapegoating, because you could have had a much better life if it were not for them. So a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, I don't hate Jews, therefore I'm not anti-Semitic. They don't understand that it's a much bigger thing than a personal emotion. It's a scapegoating mechanism that creates the hatred as its outcome, because those people, the Jews, the Zionists, they are depriving you of something, of a better life that could have been yours if it were not for them. Of course you're going to hate them. So I think by now you can see why anti-Zionism is merely the new respectable continuation of the traditional European Tsarist anti-Semitism. I have this course now. People are willing to look it up online on Zionism and anti-Zionism. It's 5 episodes. And the 5th episode, I explained that Russia and the Soviet Union do not get enough credit for their contribution to taking Jew hate global. They literally wrote the book, right? They write as a forgery the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, today, everyone can write and publish a book, no big deal. But imagine 120 years ago. 120 years ago, a book was a serious thing. So they took all those libels and all those conspiracies and they gave them the respectability of a published book. This is a book that has never been out of print in the last 120 years in every language. A lot of people, certainly, for example, in the Arab world, don't know it's a forgery. They think it's actually a nonfiction book that details the protocols of the elders of Zion and the nefarious means by which they rule the world. Now, when the Soviet Union replaced Tsarist Russia, I will also just say this: the Nazis invented nothing in terms of the ideology. They literally took it from the protocols of the elders of Zion. So when the Soviet Union replaces Tsarist Russia, it is officially against anti-Semitism because it's against what the Tsar was. And especially after World War II, they're definitely against anti-Semitism because they just defeated the Nazis. And you don't get to be more anti-Semitic than having just defeated the Nazis. So they take the word Zion and they begin to create a new respectable idea of anti-Zionism, because Hitler basically gave anti-Semitism a bad rep. People forget that anti-Semitism was a respectable idea in the 19th century. So it lost its respectability as a result of the Holocaust. So now the Soviets create anti-Zionism as its respectable replacement. And this time it's not a single book. It's a whole academic discipline. You can get PhDs in anti-Zionism. In Zionism is colonialism, racism, apartheid. Palestinian leaders throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s were all educated in the Soviet Union, getting their degrees in various forms of Holocaust denial and anti-Zionism. And this was exported by the Soviet Union into the West, basically inserting into European and ultimately Anglo societies, where it flourishes on American campuses today, this obsession with the collective Jew as the scapegoat for their problems. I recently gave a talk to Republican members of Congress. I told them, you think you defeated the Soviet Union, they might just have you beat, because even though they're long gone, they have inserted into the American system the obsession that ultimately brings societies into collapse.
Yeah. Oh boy, there's a lot there. Yeah. Let's go over some of those things. To your reference there to losing the war as a stab in the back conspiracy theory that the Jewish influencers in German politics is what led Germany to surrender, even though the Allies never set foot on German soil. Therefore, it must have been insiders that brought us down. Who's that? The Jews, of course. The blood libel, of course, goes back thousands of years or even centuries. You know, when Martin Luther wrote his book about the Jews, all the way up to, Henry Ford's book on the Jews, the Learned Elders of Zion Protocols. I've seen all of those books for sale on the book tables at these Holocaust denial conferences that I've attended. It's astonishing. I mean, they know that the Protocols is a fake, but it's a little bit like the Turner Diaries when, Timothy McVeigh read the Turner Diaries and then blew up the Oklahoma City. I don't know if you know that whole story, but the Turner Diaries is just a novel about how to overthrow the U.S. government, in the name of how a militia could do this. And you do it by blowing up something like a federal building. And Timothy McVeigh, he knows it's a novel, but it's like he's inspired by it, right? So we can make it nonfiction by actually doing it. Yeah. So then the anti-Semitism and Zionism is morphing as a reflection of what it is that people are concerned about now. So no one's talking about the blood libel quite as much as they are now, like colonialism, apartheid, genocidal, oppressors, right? So the kind of postmodern progressive notion that in a zero-sum game, if somebody's a winner, somebody else must be a loser. And so whoever's in power could have only gotten in power by oppressing somebody else. Or you can say that financially and economically. All right, so who do we look around? Well, the Jews earned disproportionately number of Nobel Prizes in science, and startup corporations and companies and tech companies and Hollywood films and and books and academic positions, just as a proportion of your population. Therefore, they must be doing something nefarious to get that kind of power.
Yeah, certainly. And again, it always requires a certain perversion of the mind, because to think about Israel as an oppressor requires someone to really not know geography. Because, like I said, as I said to those European diplomats, I tell them, open a map. The Jews are a puny, tiny, minute minority in an overwhelming Arab and Muslim Middle East. Again, still by and large committed to them not existing as a sovereign people who are equal, who have their liberty and who control their fate. This numerical, massive geographical imbalance is so simple. You don't need to do heavy research. It's not complicated. You don't have to go to a century or 2 centuries of history. Open a map. But it's inconvenient. So people kind of limit to lens, and then they just look at from the river to the sea. And even then it requires people to ignore so much. So like you said, all these new words are basically the new blood libels. And all the blood libels historically required a deformation of thinking by powers that were considered in authority. So if the church told you that Jews were Christ killers, even though you didn't really see them killing Christ, that became your worldview. All the Jews, all the time, no matter where they lived, what they looked like, if it made sense or not, because the body and position told you that they're Christ killers, that was the truth. And then when the church was no longer the source of authority and it was science, then people were told that the Jews belonged to a different race, the Semitic race, and therefore they're separate. And again, it made no sense, but it created this whole deformed notion, that this is actually scientific and real. This is why anti-Semitism was actually a respectable modern idea in the late 19th and early 20th century. And sometimes you hear the most inane argument made by some Arabs: we are Semites, therefore we cannot be anti-Semitic. And the thing is this, it's the most ahistorical argument that could be made, because the notion of saying that the Jews are a Semitic race was only ever intended by Europeans in order to single out the Jews. Actually, the Nazis, because they enjoyed such a fruitful collaboration with the Arabs, people today try to pretend that the Mufti, the head of the Arabs in the land, now known as Palestinians, that the Mufti and Hitler just had lunch. No, they were completely part of the Nazi power structure. The Mufti evaded trial in Nuremberg, basically through a side deal that allowed him to escape. The insertion of Nazi propaganda in the Arabic language through Arabic radio plagues us to this day. And the Nazis actually went out of their way to convey to the Mufti and to the Arabs that when they are anti-Semitic, they mean the Jews. That they actually think the Aryans as part of, they think of the Arabs as part of the Aryans, as part of the superior races. And again, this was given the authority of science. And today, we give authority to human rights organizations, international organizations. And again, the Soviets understood that perfectly. So they introduced the notion of giving anti-Zionism masked as support for Palestinians, the respectability not just of academic degrees, but of international institutions. So they would launder those ideas through international institutions. They brought the Zionism is Racism resolution in 1975 to the United Nations, taking advantage of the automatic majority they had together with the Muslim states in order to single out Israel and Zionism. Why in 1975? What happened? Well, what happened, except having an automatic majority, is that the UN resolved a few months earlier to fight racism. The United Nations unitedly resolved to say that racism is bad. Great. So now that we all agree that racism is bad, what the Soviet Union did is slap Zionism next to racism to basically say Zionism is bad. I've come to call this the placard strategy because you see it on anti-Israel placards. They're very ingenious because they're built like this. On one side, it says Israel, Zionism, sometimes just a Star of David. Then there's an equation sign. And then on the other side is a litany of words. And the placard strategy has been so successful that everyone knows what's on the list of words. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equals colonialism, imperialism, racism, apartheid. Then it escalates, Nazism, genocide. None of these words are new. If you're in America, they'll give it a local flavor, white supremacy. But all these words are chosen because they universally are understood to connote evil. So what people are being exposed to is almost a nursery rhyme refrain. That's why it's so ingenious, that inserts into their mind, Israel, Zionism, Star of David equal evil. Israel, Zionism, Star of David equal evil. And then in recent demonstrations, there was a placard, keep the world clean. I don't know if you saw it, and you see a Star of David in a trash bin. That placard is actually the logical conclusion of the placard strategy. Because if you tell people every day that there's an evil out there, well, people want to do good, right? The students on campuses, they believe they're good people. They're on the side of good. They want to do good. They're associated with every good cause. Well, there's no greater good than eradicating evil. So this is how it all goes together. And then when you launder it through the respectability of the UN, apartheid was laundered through the UN Conference Against Racism in Durban. Now we're witnessing in real time the laundering of genocide through the International Court of Justice. And nobody looks at the details because what matters is just to say, Israel, genocide, International Court of Justice, that's a form of authority. And then people can feel that they are respectable, that they are on the right side or the good side of history by saying Israel, Zionism, genocide. And then we go back to the idea that keep the world clean. Just a moment, I could have such a better world. The only thing that's standing between me and utopia is the Star of David. And this is one of the most ancient and dangerous ideas, that there is a better world to be out there. And the only thing that stands between the present and utopia is the collective Jew.
Perfectly said. That's why I've always railed against utopianism, because it leads to this having a goal that's unattainable. But worse, why are we not able to attain it? Because of those guys over there. In this case, the Jews. You know about the trolley problem, the thought experiment, of course. Let me reiterate that for my listeners, that the trolley's hurling down the tracks about to run over these 5 workers, and you're standing there at the switch, and you can flip the switch over and divert the trolley down a different track where it will kill 1 worker. Would you sacrifice the 1 to save the 5? Okay, so this has been run on millions of students mostly. Who so yeah, of course. I mean, it's an obvious calculation. Kill the 1 to save the 5. It gets a little tricky when you say, well, would you push a big fat guy off the bridge to stop the trolley from killing the 5 workers? It's harder for people to think, yeah, I actually have to physically push the person. But if you only have to push a button and then he drops off the bridge and stops the trolley, I'm more likely to do that, right? But the problem is that you don't want to live in a world where it's just a utilitarian calculus to see how we can achieve utopia. In this case, the other counter thought experiment is the doctor has 5 dying patients and he's got 1 healthy guy out in the waiting room. Should I sacrifice the guy in the waiting room who's healthy, take his 5 organs and save the 5? No, we would not allow that because we can't live in a world of pure utilitarianism. Okay, so that's my little riff on that. Yeah. Now, on these crazy college students that we've been seeing, when they're chanting from the river to the sea and all that kind of stuff, do they know what any of this means? How many of them are really anti-Semites and Israel haters versus they're just out there with the mob? They're kind of caught up in it. They're in their dorm room in the morning and the roommate comes by and goes, hey, there's a great march. Let's go. Yeah. They're carrying the plaque. They don't even know what they're doing. I really don't know the answer to this question, but I'd like your thoughts.
So I actually think it doesn't matter. The effort to try to think what the students themselves think. If each individual student likes Jews, doesn't like Jews, perhaps they're Jews themselves, I actually think it's irrelevant because, again, this is not about their personal feelings or their personal knowledge or whether they know what they're saying or do they know what they mean, or are they just accepting the kind of benign interpretation from the river to the sea is everyone living in harmony, intifada is just a gentle shaking off rather than a deliberate campaign of blowing up civilians. So it actually matters less what's in their head, what they're imagining, what they think, because what matters is what they're participating in. You know, over the years, I participated in these high-profile debates. Is anti-Zionism the new anti-Semitism? And I lost them all because once you make this kind of a theoretical argument, a blanket argument, then you bring the Jew who theologically is opposed to a secular state of Israel, or you bring another Jew who says he cares about Palestinians and that's why he's against Zionism. And the theoretical argument breaks down because it's supposed to be a blanket argument. And after I participated in some of those debates, especially looking at the response of the crowd, which was elated, exhilaration, almost this kind of pogrom Eve energy, because they were thrilled that they were like, okay, we're good people. I remember going back and thinking, but this is now really a theoretical question. We're not interested in splitting hairs about Jews who lived in the 19th century and what they thought. This is an urgent, practical question, which is what happens to flesh and blood Jews when anti-Zionism becomes the governing ideology of a country, a society, a political party, a campus. And here, ever since the Soviet Union introduced anti-Zionism as this respectable replacement for discredited anti-Semitism, the historical record is definite. Every place where anti-Zionism came to be the dominant ideology, the environment turned hostile to Jewish life. Even as they said, we love Jews, we have nothing against Jews, Jews are great, even when they were Jews themselves at the forefront, believing that they are birthing a better world until they were discarded, they kept saying, we love Jews, Jews are great. But as anti-Zionism became the governing ideology, within a short time, the environment turned hostile to Jewish life. And if it was not stopped, no Jews were left. So Exhibit A is the Arab world in the 40s and 50s. In the 40s and 50s, the Arab world organizes itself around anti-Zionism, around an obsessive opposition to a Jewish state, around scapegoating the Jewish state for all its ills, hiding it with the secular theology of supporting Palestinians. Within those 2 decades, from Morocco to Afghanistan, no Jews are left. And these are communities, in some cases, that preceded the Arab and Muslim conquest of the region. In Iraq, for example, Jewish communities going back to the Babylonian exile. And again, all in the name of anti-Zionism. The Soviet Union, we talked about it. We know how the Soviet Union treated its Jews. The Soviet Union claimed that it didn't even notice that Jews were Jews. They were just against Zionists, and we know exactly what happened. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn is the classic He genuinely believes he wants a better world, a good world. He's only an anti-Zionist. He doesn't hate Jews. He's not anti-Semitic. But again, as soon as he headed the British Labour Party, it became a cesspool of anti-Semitism. Jewish parliamentarians started to leave, and good for British Jews and their allies for fighting back. And let's hope it stays. Poland in 1968, you talked about academic positions. So anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are always very convenient when they begin, and think a bit for the American campuses today. It's a very convenient way to remove Jews from coveted positions in academia. So in Poland in 1968, a few Jews after the Holocaust remained in Poland, believing in the process of a communist brotherhood. And then in 68, there was a wave of anti-Zionism. Jews were removed from positions of academia, professional positions. Many left. Some actually committed suicide, unable to process the second wave of persecution so soon after the Holocaust. And Venezuela is another case, and we're seeing what's happening on American campuses today. They're saying, no, we love Jews. Some Jews are at the forefront of this anti-Zionism, but we're seeing the campuses become hostile environments to Jewish life, and this will not be fought against. The outcome will be the same as it has been in the Arab world, the Soviet Union, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, Venezuela, and Poland. No Jews will be left.
You know, this is astonishing on college campuses where even professors who are all liberal, and liberals were traditionally supportive of Jews. The entire civil rights movement and the black community in America was supported by Jews. It's just such an odd thing to kind of flip that on its head just so recently.
I thought it was odd too when it started, exactly like you. I was like, but these are the good people. These are my people, right? I come from the Israeli left. I'm a liberal on all liberal progressive causes. You'll find me in the deep left. And I was like, what's going on? You are supposed to be the ones who support Jews, Jewish self-determination. I mean, Zionism is really one of the most successful movements of liberation, self-determination for the actually longest oppressed people in history, not imagined ones. And I was like, what's going on? And then someone talked about left-wing illiberalism in some conference that I was, and I was like, bingo. They're not liberal anymore.
Mm-mm.
This is not liberalism.
Right.
This is actually illiberalism.
Yeah.
And this is why years ago, that's one of the benefits of studying Israel, the Jewish people, Zionism. You're attuned to many processes fairly early on. And I saw that building. I saw that illiberalism building, and it, like you, I was confused in the beginning, but then I realized this is something new. This is not liberal.
Okay, a couple of things right off the headlines here. I think this is an example of what you're talking about when the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court accused Israeli and Hamas leaders of war crimes, called for a ceasefire by Israel in Gaza, particularly in Rafah, and then are calling for Benjamin Netanyahu, along with some Hamas leaders, to be held trial for war crimes. Is that an example of what you're talking about, how it's morphed into this more kind of criminal court proceedings rather than the older forms of anti-Semitism?
Oh, on numerous levels, definitely. Laundering all these ideas, all these accusations through the respectability of international bodies. And I want to say something, I am not a supporter of Netanyahu. I've never voted for him. I wish him and his government not only to fall, but to never come to anywhere close to power in the next millennia. But this personalizing of the war, in his image, as if it's his war, he's doing it. And in Israel, I'm thinking, we are fighting for our very existence against people who have said it clearly, openly, that their purpose is for the Jews to not be able to defend themselves, to not be sovereign, to not exist, to go back to their proper place as inferiors. We are fighting about the most just war possible. If anything, to the extent that it is, people call it Netanyahu's war, I say it's Netanyahu's bungle. He's bungling the way that the war is mismanaged. But in terms of this being a just war of ensuring our very existence against an enemy that has made it clear that they are committed to our destruction and will be singularly devoted to achieving that, this is our war. But yes, this is one of the ways to kind of remove the Jews from their ability to defend themselves. One of the ways that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism works, because it's a scapegoating mechanism. So when you take an actual goat and you slay the goat, you can manage the goat. You're big, you're burly, you can manage the goat. But if you want to scapegoat the Jews, then you first have to make sure that they won't be able to resist their scapegoating, because they might not want to do that. So you have to begin to pull down their defenses. And the way, for example, that anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany worked is actually it was about lulling the Jews into thinking that they are not in danger. It did so by beginning to draw lines between Jews who will be protected, the good kind of Jews, the ones that fought in World War I for Germany. They were like, so that there was this it was a gradual process that actually lulled the Jews into believing that this is not going to be so bad. So the scapegoating mechanism has to remove whatever defenses the Jews have collectively organized. And the Jews have collectively organized for their defense in the state of Israel with their military, but also in places like the pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC. It's a reason that those are the places that are attacked, because those are the places that have been the most effective organizations for the defense and protection of Jews. So what you're seeing, for example, in the criminal court, in the court of justice, is the gradual process of using those international bodies to try to remove the Jews' ability to wage war, to defend themselves, and then they could be more effectively physically scapegoated in order to bring about the utopia.
Yeah. Just kind of reading up on stuff this morning, and it's, 7 months now since October 7th. And, how come it's going on for so long, and, so on and so forth. Well, the Allies invaded France on June 6, 1944, and it was 11 months before they got a surrender from Germany. 11 months. With massively larger forces and munitions and so on. That's what it takes. You have to go door to door to root out every last, enemy combatant. And that's what they're doing. I guess probably made worse by the tunnels. This would be analogous maybe to on Okinawa and Iwo Jima, where the Japanese were dug into these volcanoes. The volcanic ash is soft enough you can dig into it pretty easily and create these elaborate tunnel systems. And, Allied American soldiers had to go in there tunnel by tunnel, person by person with flamethrowers and so forth. It just takes a long time. And this is one reason we use the atomic bombs on Japan, because otherwise it would have taken a couple of years to go door to door in every single house in all of Japan. It would have cost millions of more in lives. That's just the kind of the horrors of war. That's the reality of it.
It's even, you're really pointing to trying to understand what goes on, because people are really saying so many bizarre things. But what, some experts are saying, okay, urban warfare. This is not urban warfare. This is a whole new level, because we go back to West Planning. There is a lie that I said that everything has been built on, that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. But it very much does. It represents, not just in the sense of elections, but in the sense of the deepest ethos. The deepest ethos, as we discussed, for the Palestinians is no existence of a Jewish state, no sovereignty anywhere in the land. They're consistent, they're clear, they've said it. They have this idea of return that is foundational to that. When we called our book The War of Return, people thought it was a harsh name, but people think return is this innocent, gentle idea, a nostalgia to a great grandmother's long lost home. If you read the Arab Palestinian text from the 50s, the 60s, return looks like October 7th. October 7th is actually the minute by minute realization of the Palestinian vision of return. They always imagined it as this brutal, bloody triumph over the Jewish state and the Jewish body. We will take their hearts out of their body, tear their fingernails. It's very specific images of what return is like. This is why you saw so much exhilaration on October 7th, because for decades, that's what they've been dreaming on. That's what they've been waiting for. And Hamas did that on their behalf. So when Israel gets out of Gaza in 2005, completely getting out, I worked with Shimon Peres and Sharon at the time. Sharon's idea was we are getting out completely. We're taking out the military, the civilians, the graves. We're getting out of the Philadelphia corridor, the border with Egypt, because we're not going to leave them any excuse. I think he underestimated the Palestinians' ability to make up new excuses, but at least that was the thinking at the time. We're not going to leave them any excuses. I remember even Shimon Peres, a man of peace, he had this idea, he conveyed a message to the Palestinians, the people of Fatah, supposedly the nice ones. He told them, look, the houses of the settlers, do you want to keep them? They're good houses, there's greenhouses, you can build things. The message that came back was, don't leave a brick over a brick. This should have been our clue, by the way, that their intentions was not to build for themselves, but they wanted to see Jewish destruction. So they finally control land. And contrary to these fake, Palestinian lost maps, this is actually the first time in the Arab-Palestinian history of that area where they control land. Do they say to themselves, a beautiful strip of beach, crossroads of two ancient trade routes, we're going to turn it into the pearl of the Mediterranean, the Dubai of the Middle East? Nope. They say, excellent. We are going to use this strip of land and weaponize the entire urban landscape. So this is not some urban warfare, a small group hiding among a population. They have weaponized the entire landscape for the singular purpose of destroying the Jewish sovereignty from the river to the sea, from water to water, Palestine will be Arab. And this is based on their knowledge that they are operating within a supportive population that supports their goal. So the entire weaponization goes like this. Hundreds of kilometers of tunnels that are connecting homes and mosques and apartments and clinics and kindergartens. Hundreds of piers. All the weapons are stashed ahead of time in homes, apartments, mosques, clinics. You can do that because you're operating among a supportive population. And then the entire way of fighting is about moving between those tunnels and piers, either underground. So you go underground, you come out of a pier, you go into an apartment, the RPG is waiting for you behind a teddy bear, and that's how you fight. Or you go above ground in civilian clothing, and you know that a stash of weapons is waiting for you in a clinic. So the entire Gaza Strip is a fully integrated war machine. And we have made the mistake of agreeing to go along with the West-plaining lie that we are only at war with 20, 30,000 trained Hamas murderers. Like you said, America didn't go to war with the kamikazes. They didn't declare war on the kamikazes, saying we're going to get rid of the kamikazes and then we're done. They declared war on Japan. The goal was surrender of Japan. The post-war process was the transformation of Japanese society into a democracy that forgoes war as a tool of policy. So if we're saying that the problem is only 20,000 trained Hamas murderers, the war will be almost impossible to wage because it's a lie. And Hamas is waging the war based on the truthful knowledge that they are representing their people.
Yeah. Another example of this is the moral equivalency argument often made in these kinds of debates. The Holocaust deniers said, oh, well, the Nazis did some bad things, but don't forget Hamburg and Dresden, the Allies mass carpet bombed, as if we could target bomb, which we couldn't at the time. And that's why, by the way, they didn't bomb Auschwitz, because, the idea, well, just bomb the train tracks and not the barrack. Well, it doesn't work that way. But no one's calling for the elimination of the American state for doing this. Not even for the atomic bombs, or even the two worst things we ever did, enslaving blacks and confiscating Native American lands. No one's saying, you should give it all back and eliminate the American state. No one's saying that. Not even the victims. So again, Israel, it's just unique in this situation. No matter how bad some countries behave, no one says, except for against your country, eliminate the country.
Because the problem with Israel, and again, within Israel, I have tremendous criticism in our leadership and our actions. And, there's a phrase in Hebrew that says that the floor is crooked. When someone tries to say why they can't dance well, they're like, well, the floor is crooked. So for the Jews, the floor will always be crooked. Like those deep forces, there will always be forces arrayed against us. But precisely because of that, we can afford nothing less than excellence. We can't have mediocre leadership. We can't bungle things. We can't agree to play along with lies, because if we do anything that is less than excellent, Israel doesn't have a scenario where it gently declines into third worldism. Other countries can have bad leaders. They can decline. We just start on the slope and we get slaughtered. So the issue was that, again, I think Israel should do different things for Israel. But the outcry is not because of what Israel does. The outcry is always fundamentally about what Israel is, about the fact that Israel represents the Jews essentially challenging the role that was accorded to them in history as the scapegoats, as the inferiors. And the fact that Zionism basically says, no more. We will not play the role that you have assigned to us in your history. We will not be your inferiors. We will not be your go-to scapegoats. We will defend ourselves by ourselves. Well, people are loath to part with their favorite scapegoat. And as a result, what you often see in the accusations that supposedly justify the scapegoating of Israel is that they almost always are marked by reversal of cause and effect. So people will look for, examples recently, the separation wall that was built because of Arab Palestinians engaging in indiscriminate killings of civilians in our streets, by the way, weeks and months after they could have had a state, no occupation, no settlements, capital in East Jerusalem. So Israel builds this wall to keep this campaign of slaughtering our citizens away. And then the wall becomes the reason why Palestinians are angry. No, the wall is the outcome. It's not the cause. And you have that going back decade after decade, pretty much everything that Israel is accused of. I can show how this is a reversal of cause and effect. And again, because it's not really about what Israel does, it is fundamentally about the inability to accept what Israel is, which is the self-determination, the self-defense of the Jewish people.
Yeah, okay. And to reverse that slightly for the Palestinians, ripping off the headlines, Ireland, Spain, and Norway recognize a Palestinian state yesterday. And then I look up some stuff on this. I go, okay, well, most of the world already recognizes Palestinian statehood. More than 140 out of 193 member states of the United Nations have made their recognition of Palestine, Palestinian state official. What are they talking about there?
So sometimes I call it Schrodinger's state because they recognize a Palestinian state when it's convenient. For example, mostly for the purposes of harassing Israel and international bodies. The recognition allows generally Palestinians to go to international courts. It gives them more tools to harass Israel and to continue that strategy of laundering all the libels about evil Israel and Zionism through the respectability still of international body. But when you're actually challenging them to accept the responsibilities of statehood, so for example, an issue that I study and work on, the fact that within that state, let's say the West Bank and Gaza is Palestine, within that state, you have 2.2 million, 75% of those living in Gaza, about a third of those living in the West Bank, of Gazan-born, West Bank-born, so Palestinian-born Palestinians who are registered by UNRWA as refugees from Palestine. How can you be in Palestine, born in Palestine, but a refugee from Palestine? Well, they know why, because for them, it's from the river to the sea, from water to water. Palestine will be Arab. But it doesn't make sense if you're trying to have some international rule-based order. So I challenge those countries. UNRWA, Norway, for example, is one of the major funders of UNRWA. I'm like, okay, so does your recognition of that state comes with a clear position that no one living in that state can be a refugee from that state, or that they clearly don't possess a right to settle inside Israel in the name of this idea of return. And again, remember, it's not an innocent idea. A state in which they were never citizens, in which they were never lived. I'm like, you know what? Let's clarify the whole package. But no, they don't do that. And Palestinians certainly don't accept the responsibility. If Palestine exists as a state, then Palestine just invaded Israel. And there are consequences for Palestine for invading Israel and declaring its intent for Israel not to exist. But no, right? They declared that they recognize Palestine, but Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. Again, this West-plaining convenient way because we don't want to deal with the consequences. So it's entirely Schrodinger state. They are a state if it's useful to harass the Jewish state and international bodies. They're not a state if they actually have to assume responsibility for being a state.
That's such a great analogy. For those that don't know the reference, Schrodinger's cat is both dead and alive, depending on who's doing the observing and what state of the experiment is in. That's such a great analogy. Okay, so let's see. AP story this morning outlined 4 options for Israel and Gaza: full-scale military occupation, 2, lighter occupation with Palestinian administrators, 3, a grand bargain. Reform Palestinian Authority would govern Gaza with assistance of Arab and Muslim nations, including Saudi Arabia, that would normalize relations with Israel in return for a U.S. defense pact. And number 4, a deal with Hamas. Release all of the hostages in return for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including senior militants, as well as withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, a ceasefire, and reconstruction of the entire country, leaving Hamas in control of Gaza. Your thoughts on those 4 options that they outline, or others you want to offer?
So what the options fail to ultimately recognize is, again, the idea that Hamas merely is the most brutal and recent executor of the Palestinian ideology. And this is the core of what I've been talking about for years, precisely because I came from the Israeli peace camp, believing that the conflict was only about land for peace, only about occupation settlements, saying, okay, let's just get out of the West Bank, let's get out of Gaza, supported disengagement. I, of course, voted for Rabin, for Barak. I was euphoric when Israel offered Palestinians a state in the West Bank and Gaza, no settlements, no occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, including holy sites. And I, in my time, not going back to 1947, I see Arafat in 2000, Abu Mazen in 2008, the two Palestinian leaders, walk away from clear, concrete opportunities to have a state. Everything that we thought they were fighting for. And not only do they walk away from these opportunities, they are not criticized by their people for walking away. They're actually criticized by their people for going to negotiate. But no one's criticizing them for having left the negotiations, meaning that both Arafat and Abu Mazen knew that in walking away, they were fulfilling their people's wishes. And then they follow it up with a campaign of violence. Again, in the years 2001, 2, 3, 4, misnamed the Second Intifada. Just a campaign before October 7th, it was the darkest time to live in Israel. Just a campaign of brutal massacres, deliberately of civilians by means of suicide bombers, in cafes, buses, hotels. And this is weeks and months after Palestinians could have had everything we were told they wanted. So, as an Israeli peace person, I began to ask a very simple question. Then what do they want? And what I realized is, like I said, they always told us what they wanted. We just didn't listen. Or when we listened, it sounded so outrageous that we thought, it's a bargaining position. They can't be serious. But they told us, from water to water, Palestine will be Arab. When I did the research for The War of Return, I came across a quote that I've been using ever since. It's by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister after World War II. If you know anything about Bevin, a friend to the Jewish people, he was not. And he needs to explain to the British Parliament why Britain failed to carry out the mandate for Jewish sovereignty. It didn't fail the Arabs. It created Iraq. It created Jordan. France created Syria and Lebanon. But it failed the Jews. And in parentheses, the mandate for Palestine was always understood as Jews, because before this name was hijacked in the 60s to mean Arab, it was understood to be the Roman Christian European name given to the geography where the Jewish kingdoms once stood, which is why the mandate unanimously approved by the League of Nations talks about its recognition of the historic connection between the Jewish people and Palestine, which only makes sense if everyone understands that Palestine means Jewish, and noting that historic connection is the grounds for reconstituting their homeland in that geography, because it was clear that the Jews were not foreigners in the land. They were in their ancestral homeland. And that's why everything during the 20s, 30s, 40s is called Palestine, and everyone means it's Jewish. Sometimes people on the internet try to say, oh, Palestine was a state. It existed before Israel stole it. And they show like a picture of the Palestine Football Club. And then you zoom in and you see that the names of the football players are like Goldberg and Krathammer. And they're all Jewish, because this was the Jewish football club of the pre-state, of the Jewish state in the making. So everyone understood that Palestine meant Jewish. Anyway, the British failed to help the Jews achieve sovereignty. This is why they take the mandate given to them temporarily by the League of Nations and send it back to the United Nations, the heir. So he needs to explain to the people of Britain why Britain failed. It failed the trust of the world. So he says, His Majesty's government is thus faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Now, this is February 1947. All the supposed causes for the conflict, the occupation, the settlements, Nakba, refugees, they don't exist yet. That's what I said about reversal of cause and effect. So those supposed causes don't even exist yet. And still it's called irreconcilable. He goes on to say, in the mandate area, there are Jews and Arabs. So two peoples. There's no question that those are the two nations, the two peoples. And he says each one of them has a top priority. He calls it the point of principle. He says for the Jews, the top priority is to establish a Jewish state. So the Jews want to establish a sovereign state based on the principle, the universal principle of self-determination for their people. And then he says, and for the Arabs in the land, now known as Palestinians, for the Arabs, the top priority, he says, listen to that, to prevent to the last the establishment of a Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. He doesn't say the Jews want a state, the Arabs want a state. We'd love the United Nations to help us figure out how to partition the land. He says, as a matter of top priority, the Jews want a state and the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state. By definition, irreconcilable. This is why the Jews repeatedly say yes to proposals of partition, because it fulfills their top priority of having a state. And the Arabs reject all proposals for statehood and then go to war and use violence because it fails to fulfill their top priority of no Jewish state. This has only ever been the conflict. This is what Hamas represents. So all the proposals you mentioned fail to ultimately address that no peace will ever be possible unless the Palestinian priority is gone, unless they are transformed, like the Japanese were transformed, like the Nazis were transformed, Nazi Germany, from a people whose ideology is singularly devoted to the destruction of a Jewish state, to a people who finally have a constructive ideology of wanting to live next to the Jewish state of Israel rather than instead of it from the river to the sea. Any proposal that does not address that need is destined to fail. And I have by now books and essays for years saying you cannot engage in Gaza reconstruction. All the money, I'm on record, again, essays, books saying all the money that you countries are giving to Gaza reconstruction is guaranteed to go to weaponizing Gaza through tunnels and other means, because the ideology of Gaza remains the ideology of return, of no Jewish state. So first make sure that the ideology is gone, and then you can build something, because you'll actually know that you're working with people who finally want to build for themselves rather than destroy what the Jews have built.
I know, you're amazing. So clear. Here's Hillary Clinton on Morning Joe a few days ago, or a few weeks ago. On the pro-Palestinian protest, she explains that many young people she's encountered don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly, about the history of many areas of the world. She then patiently described how, during the Oslo Accords, an offer was made to the Palestinians for a state on 96% of the existing territory occupied by the Palestinians, with 4% of Israel to be given to reach 100% of the territory that was hoped for. And that did not happen. That's your point.
Exactly. She knows it. An offer was made in 2000. An offer was made in 2008. It was a clear, concrete opportunity. Apropos Schrodinger State, this was an opportunity for an actual state, but it would have meant that they need to finally accept the Jewish state. And again, to date, if having a state for themselves in part of the land meant accepting, legitimizing, coming to terms with the existence of a Jewish state as their equal in their land, at least to date, that was not good enough. It failed their top priority of no Jewish sovereignty. She spoke to that, but again, we spoke about the students. It's not what matters.
Yeah. Okay, so I see you have next to your book there, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. I recognize the spine of that book. That's how good I am on these books. And as you know, Jared takes the big picture, the history of the world for the last 13,000 years. Big picture stuff, particularly geography. What is it about the Middle East and that particular strip of land is it a sacred value that no compromise can be allowed. Or if somebody like Biden or maybe Trump, if he gets reelected, just goes over there, takes the checkbook out and says, all right, we're going to settle this once and for all. What's the price? Give me the number. We got plenty of money. And the answer would be probably outrage, right? There's no money you could put on the sacred land. Reminded of Himmler's crazy idea of let's ship all the Jews to Madagascar. If we did that, would the Palestinians or Arabs or whoever be satisfied with that? We're going to have a Jewish state, but it's in Madagascar, not in the Middle East there.
So you're absolutely right that at the core of this are the human stories, are especially the human stories of the West, of Christianity, of Islam, and of course of the Jews. And they are at the core of this. They are at the core of this land. Over the years, people would, especially Americans, would tell me, but, the people of Gaza, they just want better, they want better conditions. That ultimately, it's money. And I would tell them, you cannot bribe people away from their belief that they are engaged in the most noble and just cause of all. And this is what they believe. They would tell me, don't the people of Gaza just want a better future for them, for their children? And when Americans say a better future, they think, oh, everyone just wants to go to college and have a nice house. And I would tell them they do want a better future for themselves. The better future is when there is no Jewish state. That's the utopia. That's the better future. For that, they're willing to sacrifice, to suffer. So they want a better future. It's just not what you think a better future is. But basically, therefore, money is not the issue here. There has to be a transformation of the story, of what it means for the Jews to be sovereign. Because as long as the Arab and Muslim story is that Jewish sovereignty in this land is a dagger in their heart, is a shameful aberration. Because again, Jews are only ever acceptable as lowly. And if they're equal, then it challenges their sense of what it is to be a proud Arab and Muslim. So as long as they think that the existence of Israel as a sovereign state where Jews defend themselves by themselves is one of shame, then of course in their mind, the honor will be to rid the region from this shame. So where I find hope, where I think we can actually begin to move forward, is in something that I've come to call Arab Zionism or Muslim Zionism. Because human stories, human religions, human systems of meaning are ultimately systems of interpretation. All religions, even when they claim to rely on sacred books, they ultimately interpret those books because the books are not always clear. So they interpret and reinterpret the books for the present moment. So you can actually interpret, and it has been done, you can interpret Christianity to be against Jewish self-determination and to be for it. You could interpret human rights, socialism to be for and against. And you can also interpret Arab and Islam, the Arab identity in Islam, to be against Jewish self-determination. That is right now the reigning interpretation. But it could also be reinterpreted to be supportive of that. And we're beginning to see those voices, especially in the Gulf countries. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the more successful, forward-looking, modernizing Arab countries are also the ones that are letting go of the crutch and obsession of anti-Zionism. Because once you remember that anti-Zionism is a scapegoating mechanism of failed societies, then when societies are no longer failing, they don't need the scapegoat because they don't need to redirect anger away from their failings. So sometimes I call the Abraham Accords, the normalization agreements with Israel, collateral benefit. We're actually not the central story here. The central story is the reforming of the Arab and Muslim identity towards one of tolerance. It therefore flips the lens from an Arab and Muslim vision of Israel as white European, settler, colonialist, crusader, which are just all synonyms for foreign, and therefore eject them, kill them. And they're flipping the lens to say Abraham. By our Arab history, culture, and Muslim belief, we actually recognize the Jews not as foreigners, but as a people with a history, with a connection. And we understand that the state of Israel is the expression of the historic connection of the Jews to the land. So as long as the Jews want to be sovereign in the land of Israel, which is what we want, sometimes people ask me, why not somewhere else? I'm like, everywhere else would be exile. We are only as a people home in the land of Israel. Individually, you might be home in other countries, but as a people, we are
West
only
Hollywood.
ever a people in connection to the land of Israel. So as long as we care about being sovereign, self-defending in the land of Israel, we are destined or damned, choose your word, to remain a tiny minority in an overwhelming Arab and Muslim Middle East. Again, the Arab and Muslim conquest of the 7th century, hugely successful, well done. So we will remain a minority. We'll never get out of that, which means that the only way for true peace, not endless war, is if the Arab and Muslim world transforms its understanding of Jewish self-determination as being something that is compatible with a proud Arab and Muslim identity, with a successful one. And rather than look at living next to a Jewish state as a mark of shame, view it as a mark of honor. That transformation holds the key to peace.
Yeah. Wow. Perfectly said. So the problem is two-state solution is not that there's a Jewish state and there isn't a Palestinian state. The problem is that there's a Jewish state, period.
Exactly. You know, in the 90s, when Palestinian leaders said 2 states, they supported two-state solution, we made the crazy assumption that one of the two is the Jewish state. In retrospect, right. We should have checked.
Yeah.
Because when they said 2 states, they meant an Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza and another Arab state to replace Israel through this idea of refugee return of millions. For the last century, there was actually never for a single minute an Arab-Palestinian vision of peace by 2 states where one of the two is Jewish. So anyone proposing 2 states needs to first make sure that the Arabs and Muslims, and especially the Palestinians, have come to terms with the fact that one of the two will be Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of research on sacred values and what happens when they get violated as a kind of an intuitive sense of what we're talking about here. The joke line from Woody Allen is, oh, you're looking for your other earbud. Yeah, that's a good idea. Make sure you can hear me. There you go. Can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay. The joke from Woody Allen, he holds up his wrist and he has a watch on. He says, "My grandfather on his deathbed sold me this watch." It's like, what? And then other examples, if you invite me over for dinner and to your home and I offer to pay you, you'd be offended. Or, like in that the Robert Redford movie, Indecent Proposal, where his character offers to $1 million to spend the night with the Demi Moore character, the wife of Woody Harrelson's character, and they're just outraged. Eventually they do it, and everything falls apart after that. But that's the kind of thing that you just don't pay for. Like organ sales. This is a big issue. We don't have enough kidneys to go around. People have extra kidneys. Why not sell them? And there's rational arguments on both sides, but ultimately it kind of comes down to that's just not right. To sell an organ is just not right. Or sex workers, that's now become a term instead of prostitution. There's sex workers, and what consenting adults do is nobody's business. But the pushback is really just kind of this intuitive, sacred value. You don't pay for sex. That's just wrong. Just feels wrong. And so land and sacred history, long history is in that category.
Yeah, and that's why, again, it's reversal of cause and effect. You can't pay people to change their values. There needs to be a transformation. For example, the transformation in the Gulf is the outcome of 9/11, the Arab Spring, the failure of their Arab Spring, ISIS, What some leaders in the Arab world understood, if that they will not develop an Arab and Muslim vision that will appeal especially to young men, uh, they will not survive. So they went about not just building skyscrapers and new cities and sending women into space. I think what some of the Gulf leaders are engaged in doing is nothing less than the transformation of Islam and the Arab identity. So this is something that has to come from within. People have to believe in it. You can't bribe them into it. They have to want to go through this transformation, which again, I think Israel on its part should make it very clear. I think it's a shame we're not clear that the day that the Palestinians will end their century-long war against a Jewish state, once they develop a constructive vision of wanting to live next to the Jewish state rather than instead of it, with all the implications that they are not refugees, there's no right to settle in Israel in the name of return, they are guaranteed to meet a willing Israeli public and leadership that will want to live with them side by side in peace. And by the way, the reason that we can guarantee that goes back to the numerical imbalance. It's not because we're nice or have great values. It's because we're small. So we will always compromise on pretty much most things except our survival. So yes, once they are no longer committed to our non-survival, we are happy to share, we will make peace. I think Israel needs to make that declaration. I think Israel needs to work and campaign to withdraw the fuel that allows this idea to continue. Organizations like UNRWA, Qatari money, that allow Palestinians to continue to believe that Israel is a temporary aberration. And then you can bring in Emirati, Saudi, moderate Muslim, forward-looking Arab and Muslim forces, countries that can help Palestinians shape a constructive, forward-looking identity that wants to build for themselves rather than destroy the Jewish state. But ultimately, it has to be something that they want. They can be helped to achieve it. You can definitely do things that support it. But ultimately, it's a transformation of their identity, and it's not something that you can do through a crass purchase.
Yeah, of course. And is the problem that it's a religious identity or a political or cultural identity or all three? And then how do you change identity, like from the bottom up through, I don't know, literature and film and just kind of pop culture, or do you do it from the top down through legislation, or what are your thoughts on that?
So the short answer is everything. But of course, that all of this is wrapped in what you call religion, theology, old stories, sociology, history about the proper role of the Jews, libels. This is all part of this combustible mix. But really, what makes it even more challenging is that going back to over a century ago, when the Jews began to really build the foundations of the new modern state of Israel, the Arabs begin to fight against them. And part of it was, of course, changing demographics. A huge part of it, I would argue, the bigger part of it is, again, the inability to accept the Jew not being below them. But what the Arabs of the land discovered fairly early on, already in the 1920s and 30s, is that they were very interesting precisely because they were waging a total, complete war against the Jews, and not just any Jews, the Jews who dared challenge the idea of the role of the Jew as a scapegoat, as inferior. The Jews that dared imagine equality, dignity, sovereignty. The fact that they were the tip of the spear fighting those Jews, and especially that idea, made them invaluable to every anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist power in the last century, which is why in the 30s and 40s they enjoy a very fruitful collaboration with the Nazis, as we described. with, again, repercussions that plague us to this day. In the 40s and 50s, when the Nazis head to the dustbin of history, they are replaced by the Pan-Arabists that turned Palestinianism again to the secular core theology of what it means to be an Arab. And when the Pan-Arabists are defeated, they are replaced by the Soviet Union, that, as we discussed, takes anti-Zionism masked by Palestinianism global and into the global institutions. And then the Soviet Union is defeated, and it's ultimately replaced by Iran. So the good news in all of this is I can, with high level of certainty, assure you that the Mullah and Ayatollah regime in Iran will find itself in the same dustbin of history with the Nazis, the Pan-Arabists, and the Soviets, all the previous supporters of the Palestinian cause of no Jewish state. The bad news is that all these ideologies and regimes, on their way to the dustbin of history, they caused a lot of damage to the Jews. That was a bit of our discussion on the right side of history, that yes, ultimately the Nazis were defeated, but for the Jews, it didn't feel like victory. So something can ultimately turn right in history, but in the process, we lose a lot. We are hurt. So the question is, until the Ayatollah regime finds itself in the dustbin of history, how much damage will it cause to the Jews? And of course, how much mayhem will they cause to the world? Because the Nazis and the Pan-Arabists and the Soviets and the Iranians are also causing some global mayhem. It tends to go together. So you're right, all of this plays into it. The collaboration between the Arabs, the Palestinians, and every anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist power plays precisely on these ancient ideas about Jews. It all plays into that, which is why this is a transformation that is in many ways a theological, almost religious reinterpretation. The reason that I call it long-term optimist. I call myself sometimes these days a long-term peace activist, because I understand that making peace is not about drawing borders, getting rid of settlements, occupation, basically easy things. I understand that it requires nothing less than the transformation of the Palestinian identity. So I draw some hope from cases like Japan, like Nazi Germany, where you're right, it was both top down and bottom up, and a complete transformation of land ownership and school books and radio and pop culture. And it was a full transformation of a society, but also combined with occupation, with military defeat. So combining everything together. And some transformations, like the ones that are happening in the Gulf, are as a result of outside events like the Arab Spring and its failure, like 9/11, like ISIS, that causes society to understand that they need to change course. In many ways, this has been the tragedy of the Palestinians and of us, that every time that the Arabs in this land, several hundreds of thousands in the beginning, several millions now, every time that they could have said, you know what? Mobilizing our entire resources, society, sacrificing our people for the singular goal of destroying the Jewish state, maybe not the best use of our resources. Every time that they could have had that change of mind, because they were so valuable to greater forces as the cover, the respectable cover for their anti-Zionism, for their anti-Semitism, those forces swooped in to say, no, 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 change nothing. You are pure victims of pure evil, and kept going. This is why the transformation will involve, as much as possible, cutting them off from those sources of support to keep fighting the Jewish state. Again, no mean task, but that's how we need to understand what's going on. I'm very much aware that the message that I'm conveying is tough. And before October 7th, I would give a lot of talks, but still not a lot of people were willing to listen. After October 7th, clearly more people are willing to listen because they think there's something to it. But still, a lot of people struggle with it. especially when I tell them, this is the Palestinian ethos. And they say, oh, you're exaggerating. This is a broad brushstroke. You have your from the river to the sea people. They have their from the river to the sea people. Extremists on both sides. And I tell them, you know what? Precisely because I'm not backing down from my argument, I've made myself so easy for a takedown. I'm so vulnerable to be proven wrong. So by all means, prove me wrong. Find me a Palestinian who publicly, like I said, only things that are said publicly are of value, and in their own words, so nobody's westplaining that for me, I hear them directly, says the following, and not some mushy things like, I want peace, I want the war to end, ceasefire. Because again, during the 90s, there was this governing idea for the negotiations of constructive ambiguity. Let's fudge the issues. The sides will sign an agreement that will build trust, and then we'll deal with the difficult issues. We know that this constructive ambiguity was a disaster, right? The Palestinians said 2 states. We thought it meant one of them was Jewish. They didn't mean that. It was a disaster. So now I'm a proponent of constructive specificity. Let's be really clear. So find me a Palestinian who publicly and in their own words says, I, a Palestinian, recognize the equal, not superior, not exclusive, the equal right of the Jewish people as a people to self-determination in their historic homeland. I want to live in an Arab state of Palestine next to the Jewish state of Israel, not from the river to the sea. I understand the implication is that when living in the West Bank and Gaza, I'm not a refugee from Palestine from the river to the sea, and I have no right to settle inside the sovereign state of Israel in the name of return. And then I tell them, go, find me. And don't bring me the same 3 people that I already know. And, one of those people, I discovered him in recent months. He's very courageous, very active on Twitter. When I posted that I've only, in a 20-year journey of seeking such Palestinians, have only ever met 3, do you know what his response was? Who are the other 2? His response was not, oh, there's so many, come meet us. He was like, who are the other 2? So I know it's a tough message, but because of this combustible combination of the Arabs, Palestinians fighting the Jews, seeking self-determination, getting support from every anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist power in the last century, because this is such a combustible combination, their entire identity became that of the complete rejection of the Jewish state. Even the name Palestinians, like I said, reflects the hijacking of the name Palestine to say that this is a purely Arab identity rather than the way that it was understood before. So there would have to be a transformation of the identity. It will have to be in many ways a global effort as much as possible, but that is the only way to peace. So if people are serious about peace, that's what it requires. Anything less is a different version of the last century's basically forever war.
You need somebody like a Nelson Mandela to come forward on their side and say, we're going to do it different now. And then everybody goes, yeah, that's a good idea.
Exactly. For no one to talk him down.
Right. Yeah, well, good luck with that. It's looking pretty tough now, but
oh yeah.
Einat, you've been amazing. Just so clear on all this stuff. It's just remarkable. You should come over and do an American university lecture tour if you wouldn't get canceled and shouted down, because they need to hear this. So we'll try to get this out to as many people as possible. Your message is really important, as is your book, The War of the Return. And so we'll put links to that in the show. Thank you so much for your time. We went over 90 minutes. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the time.
I think it's late there, right? Are you in?
Yeah, but it's Friday night, so
it's Friday night.
I get to sleep in tomorrow.
Go have a glass of wine now, or whatever it is,
exactly.
Whatever you want to do at late night.